Okay, well, we are at the top of the hour here, so I think we'll begin. Welcome, everyone, to what is bound to be a fascinating discussion with two professionals who've been covering Ukraine and its front lines for many years. Long before Russian President Vladimir Putin in February dramatically escalated the war that he'd already been waging against the country for 6 years. I'm Jen Judson, the 115th president of the National Press Club, and I'm also a land warfare reporter for Defense News. And I'm pleased to moderate today's discussion with Christopher Miller, world and national security reporter at Politico, who has lived for more than 12 years in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and Tanya Kozyreva, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Give me a thumbs up if I did. A Ukrainian journalist who has been a Pulitzer Prize nominee and is an incoming Nieman Fellow at Harvard. This event is hosted by the National Press Club's International Correspondents team, led by Elizabeth Hagedorn and the State Department correspondent for Al Monitor. And I want to thank team member Viola Ginger and Press Club membership director Kate Helster for organizing this event. Let me briefly introduce our guests. Chris Miller joined Politico just this April after several years with BuzzFeed News. He previously was a correspondent for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and has also worked for Mashable and has been published in Britain's The Guardian, The Telegraph, The Times, and The Independent, as well as Politico Europe, Vice News, and CNN. From 2013 to 2014, he was a news editor and reporter on the Kyiv Post team that won the 2014 Missouri Honor Medal for Distinguished Service in Journalism for coverage of events in Ukraine that year. He is the author of the forthcoming book, The War Came to Us, about Ukraine's tumultuous recent history through peacetime, revolution, and war, drawing intimate portraits of people and events shaping the nation and forging a new Ukrainian identity. It is to be published by Bloomsbury Books. Tanya Kozyreva is an investigative reporter based in Kyiv. She previously spent 3 years at BuzzFeed News, where she exposed some of the business dealings of President Donald Trump's inner circle, and was a member of that news outlet's FinCEN Files project with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. That project was a 2021 Pulitzer Prize finalist in international reporting. She also worked on the Pandora Papers, the groundbreaking investigation into global corruption that also was conducted by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. In addition to covering the military conflict in Eastern Ukraine, Kozyreva reported on Ukraine's 2014 Revolution of Dignity, which some of you know as the Maidan Revolution, for the journalist-owned Ukrainian broadcaster Hromadske. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly either. She also co-founded Posipaki.info, a website that helps track the business interests of members of parliament. Kozyreva authored a guest essay in the New York Times in May entitled, "I Spent Weeks on Ukraine's Front Lines. Everything Has Changed." She recently became one of 24 journalists named a Nieman Fellow for a year of study at Harvard University starting in the fall. Before we get started, just a reminder to all of those watching that we will take questions. Please post them in the Q&A box and we'll take as many as time permits. To get started with our discussion, I'd like to know how each of you became journalists. So Tanya, I'll have you kick things off and then followed by Chris.
I think I had a dream to be a good journalist, and I started thinking about this or dreaming about this in I think in school, in high school, and then I just choose the right university, and then I had I think I start to be a journalist in practical way, like to start publishing the article when I was a kid, but it was like very, basic way of explaining the things or reporting from the school or something like that. I think in the university, somehow I realized that in order to be a good journalist, you have to not only read books, but you have to, work as a journalist. And I would say that that Ukrainian universities doesn't do a really good job regarding the practice for Ukrainian students. So I was basically getting my practical knowledges about journalism during my summer practical scholarship with real Ukrainian media. And basically, this is how I got to a Ukrainian TV channel, which was back then state TV channel. It's which became later the first public TV channel, Suspilne TV. And I met there great journalism who taught me everything I know now. And some of them later formed Hromadske TV, which is like journalist own internet television. And I would say Hromadske was the first independent media formed by created by independent journalists who realized 8 years ago that they have to do something. They had to, create independent voice that would report about the revolution of dignity, Maidan revolution, and this is how I would say the long way of independent journalism started in Ukraine, and I think it's still lasting. And I think independent journalism is one of the qualities that Ukraine has now, and which basically allows the whole world to know the truth about the war in Ukraine, the war with Russia. I don't know if it's answered your question, but
thank you. That was great. And I'll turn it over to Chris now.
That was very thorough, Tanya. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, and had always taken an interest in writing and literature, but hadn't really thought about going into journalism until I had a college counselor and a couple of university professors highlight the fact that I wasn't doing particularly well in some undergraduate courses that were not writing related. And they very kindly nudged me in the direction of writing, and particularly nonfiction writing, and a journalism 101 course. And that journalism 101 course led to some jobs with local media in Oregon. And I sort of bounced around from one small news outlet to another city outlet to a regional outlet and a state magazine before I finished my undergrad in 2008 at Portland State University. And then from there, the financial crisis happened, and a lot of media were being devastated by the economic crisis, and journalists were losing their jobs, not finding new ones. I had just graduated and was looking to step up from cub reporter to a more junior level position, and there just weren't many around. So I actually joined the US Peace Corps, which sent me to Ukraine, which is how I got over there. This wasn't a decision that was made by me. I was actually supposed to go someplace in Africa and ended up in Eastern Europe. I would say it's worked out pretty well. I spent 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer working in Donetsk Oblast, Eastern Ukraine, which is now the front line of the war. And instead of heading back to the US in, I think it was May or June 2012 when I finished Peace Corps, I decided to stick around and get into foreign correspondence and moved to Kiev. Got that job at the Kiev Post that you'd mentioned at the top, and then eventually started stringing for several news outlets that needed reporters to cover the Maidan Revolution, or what's now known as the Revolution of Dignity. And from there, just sort of worked my way through or up, into the position that I've got now at Politico. it was certainly an interesting journey, but one that almost didn't happen if I had just passed those business courses back at university in 2000. I guess what would it be, 2004 or 5, something like that. Yeah, and here we are.
Well, that rings very true to me. I too was graduating from a journalism program during the downturn economy. So I'm glad you ended up where you did. You have contributed so much, as well as you, Tanya. I wanted to ask to you, Tanya, how has journalism changed in Ukraine since you began? Obviously there's been a lot happening in recent months that have drastically changed, I think, coverage, but talk a little bit about the evolution of journalism in Ukraine.
Well, when I started, I think it was 2005. The journalism was mostly divided into two groups. It was like oligarch-owned media, and the second group was like state-owned media, and both of them were not like impartial or independent. Both those groups were deeply dependent, and mostly, some of them were fighting for their own interest. Some of them were, trying to discredit their business opponents or something like that. So, and there were like very, I would say, few media that would, trying to do some independent coverage, and one of them is Ukrainska Pravda, who is online, which is online publication or online media, and it's already, I think, has a 12 years history, which is for Ukraine, it's a lot of years in media business, And they started like a blog, one of the Ukrainian independent journalists who were banned by all the TV channels and by all the state-owned media. He was banned. His name was Georgi Gongadze, and for several years he tried to do this independent media, Ukrainska Pravda, and then he was killed. And from the investigation, we know from the public investigation, or from the part of investigation that we know so far, we know that the president Leonid Kuchma somehow was involved in this killing situation, if I can say that. But this is how the history of Ukrainska Pravda begins. And at the beginning, they had like 14 readers, and now they have like millions readers every day. And so this is, if we are talking about the involvement of independent Ukrainian media. And I would say that the situation slightly changed in 2014 when the revolution started. And when I told you that, that Hromadske TV was created, it was like online stream platform in YouTube, which were broadcasting the revolution 24/7. So we didn't have any weekends or breaks, nothing, we were dedicated to cover as many and to show as many footage as we could back then. So I would say in 2014, many independent media was created by journalists. Some of them were still doing the good quality investigations, like Slidstvo Info, or for example, Scheme, the program which is created with Radio Liberty. So many of those independent voices were created, and they got support from the public. Some of them got support from the grants and embassies of some countries, and some of them have the programs which are supporting independent media in Ukraine. But now the situation, I would say, since the war started, the situation with the Ukrainian media, it's a bit complicated. From one side, it got, big boost of readers, viewers. So it has enormous followership. Like people are from around the world are following Ukrainian journalists, and some of them are, Twitter stars. They're having like 1 million followers, and I'm not joking here. And this is like incredible, attention, and we all like thankful for that. But from the other side, I think we have to talk about the, about the problems that are faced, like about the problems that Ukrainian media are facing now, and most of them are financial problems. Some media, they're dependent on the advertisements, and they're not getting the money right now from the big business, or like basically anyone who would give money before, from the business side, and same with grants and financial support from readers, because many Ukrainian readers would rather support, for example, the army right now, or volunteers, or I don't know, or orphans. There are so many other groups to support right now besides independent media. So it's, right now the situation is like very, I would say, complicated. And the other side, that many like great Ukrainian journalists, men journalists, they joined the Ukrainian army. And this is, this is something I think that Ukrainian journalists are losing right now. The good quality journalists who decided to join the army, and apparently some of them will not survive. So this is the biggest concern, I think.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, is there anything that foreign news organizations can do to help Ukrainian journalists who may not be able to get paid to do their job in their normal day job, but are basically doing coverage for free for the sake of getting information out that's important to the cause and the fight? Is that through potentially engaging more on the freelance side? Have you seen some news organizations kind of step up to try to pick up Ukrainian journalists and find a way to get them paid?
So regarding the freelance, this is like, it's a lot of work right now for freelancers in Ukraine. This is true. But if we are talking about the bigger picture, and if we're talking about 100% of Ukrainian journalists, I would say not all of them, can be a freelancer for foreign media. And the other thing, not many staff reporters can, freelance for, for international media. The other problem is many of them do not speak English, or, it's hard for them to somehow work with international media, although they're great reporters, but some of them, this is the issue, they do not speak English, or they do not understand English. But generally speaking, I would say that I would advise, to big newsrooms, to big international newsrooms, to basically to cooperate with the Ukrainian media, to cooperate, newsroom cooperates with Ukrainian newsroom, for example, and it somehow, I think, would be very, very useful for both sides, because Ukrainian journalists, I think many of them would learn a lot from international newsrooms, but at the same time, probably they would get this financial support for working, for example, if independent, if, I don't know, New York Times, for example, would wanna ask some newsroom or some reporter in the newsroom to find out some information, or to work on this topic, for example, I think that would be very useful in great cooperation for both newsrooms, for both media. This is something that I made up just now. I think if you would talk to all those media, Ukrainian media, and ask them, they would tell you different opinions or different ideas. So yeah, I think there is a broad of ideas. How can you help to Ukrainian media and somehow to support them?
Well, I like the brainstorming that you just did. Chris, forgive me if this is incorrect. I'm trying to remember. Is Politico opening an office in Kyiv?
I don't think so. I am the office.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I am the office.
Talk about, you were recently hired by Politico, what their expectations are for you now that you are the office in Kyiv, what your coverage plans are.
Well, considering my editor is probably watching or listening to this, or will at some point. I think Politico brought me on, I think, to supplement their already really great coverage on the U.S. side of things, on particularly what Washington has been doing to support Ukraine, what it is continuing to do. We have some really, really talented reporters on the World and National Security Desk who are focused on the conflict. My task is to kind of work on the flip side of that. What do things look like, sound like, feel like on the ground? What are the Ukrainians saying? Really trying to elevate Ukrainians' voices, needs, using my years of experience and sources there to collaborate with my colleagues in Washington or in Brussels or other EU countries, because we also have the Politico Europe operation, to supplement our coverage, but also to, I think, enhance it, right? I mean, I don't think prior to my being hired at Politico that we had dispatches from the ground in Eastern Ukraine, but, I was there for some time earlier this month, published a series of dispatches there. There have been several stories that I've worked on in collaboration with colleagues in Brussels and Washington, or even as far west as California. I worked on a piece about Elon Musk's Starlink systems, and I think we were in. We had people in 3 different countries, 5 different cities, on at least 3 or 4 different desks, collaborating on this story that started with an idea from Brussels, was pitched to a reporter in California and my editor in Washington and me in Ukraine. And then during my reporting in Eastern Ukraine, I just made a point while reporting on the weapons systems that I was seeing and the strategy on the ground to also keep my eyes peeled for Starlink systems and how the soldiers were using them. And was able to, I think, successfully, build this story across desks and offices that otherwise wouldn't have been possible, I think, a couple of months ago. So really just to enhance the already really great, smart coverage that we have been doing on the national security side of things, with some color and voices from the ground in Ukraine, where the war is playing out.
All right, I should have asked this earlier, but can you each say where you are right now?
Sure, I'll start. I'm actually in New York. I just got home from another 2 months in Ukraine. I bounce back and forth. For most of the last decade, I've spent anywhere between 2 to 4 months in Ukraine, and then a couple of weeks or a few weeks back home in New York. So I sort of for most of that time, I've lived in 2 different places, but spent a vast majority of my time living and working in Ukraine, which has been since, I guess, 2010 or so, the focus of my reporting and writing. So I'll be here for a few weeks before going back for the next round.
Well, I'm in Washington, Warsaw, sorry, not Washington, Warsaw right now, applying for a J1 visa because yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a Nieman Fellow, upcoming Nieman Fellow, and this is hard process of getting US visa right now because, you know, the US embassy is working right now in Ukraine, but it doesn't issue visa. So basically every person who wants to apply for a visa, it has to leave the country first and then apply for it in Warsaw, like me, for example. So yeah, I'm here to basically for doing all the paperwork needed to get the US visa right now for the student US visa. Yeah.
How long
Jen, could I jump in and say, oh, sorry, I was just going to add something to your follow-up question for Tanya and Ukrainian media and what we Western media can do. I mean, I'll make it short, but you know, there are extremely intelligent, talented Ukrainian journalists that are doing really great work, and not all of them speak English, but many of them do. And there are two really great outlets, Novaya Vremya, New Time, and Ukrainska Pravda, Ukrainian Truth, that both publish and translate some of their articles in English. So following them is not only going to be beneficial to the Western media world, but connecting with them to potentially collaborate or you know, work on or connecting for sources to, you know, fill out our stories and ensure that Ukrainian voices are in our reporting would be a great way of sort of like, I mean, elevating everybody's work, but also highlighting the work of the people who are not only doing it as journalists, but also having to live in a war zone. You know, there are a lot of things that people like Tanya and other Ukrainian journalists deal with on a daily basis, right? I can fly home to New York. Any male journalist my age doesn't have the ability to leave the country right now because of martial law, because they're at war. So, you know, they don't get a break. You know, they're working around the clock, and when they're not, they're worried about whether or not a missile is going to come falling down on top of them.
Absolutely. And Tanya, I was going to ask, where in Ukraine are you from originally, and how has that been affected by the war, and how is your family doing?
My family is doing okay because I think it's located in the region which is not impacted by the war so far, but the situation is changing every day. So like, it's hard to make any prognosis, but my family and my parents specifically, they're one of those people who doesn't want to leave their houses, you know, their home and their land, I would say, and the country that they, I don't know, love probably, or think, and yeah, this is the choice that they made, and I was, you know, the person who was like convincing them to at least go to the like rural mountain area where there will be no airstrikes or anything potentially, but they are still in a very denial, you know, position, and they don't want to go anywhere. I live and based in Kiev right now. The situation in Kiev seems normal for those who stayed and never left Kiev, because they know, you know, they have something to compare. They saw how it was intense in the beginning, and for them it looks normal right now. And but there is still a curfew starting 11 p.m. and there are checkpoints in the city, so you can still feel the war, and definitely you can hear it from time to time, because sometimes the rockets are landing in Kiev or in the outskirts of Kiev. So it's still intense, and I would say that majority of the population of the capital doesn't want to go back, or they're not planning to go back, just because the situation seems not very stable, or not very, you know, safe.
Okay, can you each tell us about a particular experience of getting to and from a frontline area of this war? You know, how you traveled, what security precautions you took, you know, to the extent that you feel comfortable talking about it. And we, you know, I fully understand if you'd rather not reveal certain details, but you know, what you saw there and what story resulted from that. What was the key revelation that you came away with? Maybe Chris can start this one off, and then we'll go to Tanya.
Yeah, sure. I've got a Ukrainian cat on my lap. Sorry, but let's see. Well, I'll tell you about my latest trip. You know, first of all, just the intensity of the war right now is much greater than it has been since I think it first broke out in 2014. You know, just the weapon systems that are being used are bigger. They are indiscriminate. The use of air power in this conflict is unprecedented for the conflict in Ukraine. You know, which makes it much more dangerous to move anywhere around the country. You know, the infrastructure in the eastern part of the country is just traditionally not as great as the infrastructure in the rest of the country. So it takes us, I mean, drives that should take 30 minutes or an hour can take several hours. There, you know, we go through several checkpoints or block posts, having to show our accreditation that we apply for through the Ukrainian armed forces. Without these permission slips, essentially, is what they are. You know, we're not able to cover or move around the country. It's what allows us to interview soldiers, to take photographs of anything. You know, so once we get through, I mean, once we figure out where we want to go, it's a matter of coordinating our arrival with the military or whichever military force we want to visit and embed with. So, for instance, I visited the 93rd Mechanized Brigade in Borovinkova, which is just south of Izum. So it's actually this little area that is a frontline position in eastern Ukraine, but it's south of the city of Kharkiv and technically in Kharkiv Oblast, but it's right on the border with Donetsk Oblast. And it's part of this sort of crescent where Russian forces are really pushing to capture the rest of eastern Ukraine's Donbass region. And, you know, it was several phone calls to agree on a time and a day to visit some of these positions with the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. You know, we wanted to see some of the American weapon systems and Western weapon systems that were being used, as well as some of the artillery systems that the Ukrainians have had in their arsenal that they're using more frequently. And so, you know, we had a lot of asks. They said, we'll try to see whatever is possible. It was a negotiation. We finally settled on a day when we could meet some of the artillerymen in this particular unit. And you know, I would say this is what happened next was very, very typical. You can make all of the plans in the world, and then all of those plans will completely fall apart once you're en route. So we drove maybe 40 miles. It took us almost 3 hours to get to where we needed to go to meet them. We hopped in a car together with a military press officer and another soldier. It was myself and my Ukrainian photographer. And we were heading to a position when on the horizon, suddenly there was a massive artillery attack. The entire sky turned black and gray. And we got a call on the radio saying, "Don't come here." It was the unit commander who was saying, "We're under attack. We're all underground right now. You can't come. It's too dangerous." So we pulled over to the side of the road. We sort of watched this play out from a distance and waited for another hour until we could either visit that position that we had originally planned to or move to another one. In the end, we ended up getting permission to go to another nearby position that took about 30-40 minutes to get to. It was nearby, and there was an artillery duel happening. We saw and got to witness the Ukrainian side of that. So we saw what's called a Gvazdika or Carnation artillery system being used by the Ukrainians. They were dug pretty deep into this really narrow tree line. And the idea for myself and my photographer was to be able to see and feel what the war at this stage was like. In Kiev and in Kharkiv, in the first weeks of Russia's invasion, the two sides were fighting in close combat, right? There was a ton of street to street fighting around the Ukrainian capital Kiev, in that region, in Kharkiv as well. A lot of self-propelled artillery systems on the roads being used in close quarters. Now in Eastern Ukraine, it's a cat and mouse game of artillery fire. It's, lob a dozen or 2 dozen rockets or artillery shells in one direction, pack up, move before the other side can fire back on you. And, most of these guys fighting haven't seen their enemy on the other side of the line, because they are 2 or 3 or 4 or even more miles apart right now. The only close quarters combat that we're seeing is in the city of Severodonetsk, which I think the Russians have all but taken over, with the exception of one or two city blocks, where Ukrainian forces are holed up in a factory, very similar to the situation that we all saw play out in Mariupol in the southeast. But outside of Severodonetsk right now, it's a massive artillery duel, and so we took great pains to get to this position, and then actually another position as well, where we saw some guys using smaller mortar systems to get a feel and a sense of what this looked like, and also to, in between the shelling, interview these Ukrainian soldiers to find out what they needed, what they're running out of, and what the conflict would look like if they did and did not get a lot of the Western military assistance that is starting to come into the country. So I would say that's a pretty typical day out there. Everything that you plan can quickly fall apart, and often does. And it's great to have a contingency or two.
All right, I'll pass things over to Tanya.
Well, I would say it's a lot of issues that journalists can face in the war zone in Ukraine, but recently another issue added, and it's a petrol problem or gasoline problem. It's like a huge shortage of petrol right now in Ukraine, and it's basically very hard to get petrol anywhere near Donbass or. So it's the plan, or the fact that you have to always keep in mind and have to strategize this. And basically the drivers that work with us, they had this always in mind, and they were hustling and hunting for petrol stations and petrol, and some of them had this cars that accepting both like petrol and gas, so they could last longer, or basically diversify this issue. The other thing is that that military was not very happy to see journalists in the war zone at the beginning of the conflict, and I can explain this in this issue, because first issue is they were very busy and nervous to fight, actual Russian troops, and not to babysit some journalists who are coming, and trying to interview them when they're super stressed. But as soon as this, first, I think after the first months of the conflict, they were pretty much more relaxed to cooperate or to coordinate with the journalists, and sometimes there were press officers would rather tell you to go to more safe place, which they're saying that it's more safe, but in reality it's artillery firing every 15 minutes So we went to one of those places, which is in Pisky, and this is the village like just 15 kilometers away from Donetsk, which is like occupied since 2014, and which is like a frontline village since then, since 2014. And when we, start interviewing some soldiers, the artillery fire started, and we just were forced. At the beginning, the soldiers were like, "Oh, it's like a random thing. It's happening every day. It's a casual. It's not like they're shooting not this position. They're shooting other positions. So like relax." Oh, and I think 10 minutes later, they were like, oh, we should go to the bunker now. So we were hiding in the bunker, I think, for at least half an hour while, they were basically firing the position where we were. And it was pretty much intense. And, it's artillery is like very random thing, it can land very close, and the car. So the plan was to go to the safe place, leave our car, and then to hop on the military car and go with them to the position. So this car left the position as soon as fire started. So we couldn't basically leave the position, and we were forced to stay. And when we were in this bunker, the soldier was, saying like, oh, it's like, this is their strategy. This is Russian strategy. They're first firing artillery and then they're moving by tanks. So it was, it was really intense hours. And I think journalists have to be prepared for this, mentally. And physically, I think. While we were talking with the Ukrainian soldiers, they basically showed us the Western weapon. They showed us an NLAW, and they told that we have just several of them, like this anti-tank weaponry, and we want more, because it's like, two of those, it's not enough, for one position. And I have to tell that, several weeks after we spoke to some of those soldiers, I got the message from their mates that they, got under the fire and they died basically. So the situation, even in the safe position, as they call it, the situation is not safe at all, not for soldiers, not for, for Ukrainian journalists or for international journalists too. So I think this is, underestimating the threat is one of the reason, I think, why so many journalists died already in this conflict, because sometimes you get used to this threat and you underestimate it, and this is where you are in danger, and you're in trouble, I would say.
Thank you. So, obviously seems to be a shifting strategy by the Russians in the invasion. They came in with 40-mile convoy, failed logistically. They had it's what seems like a very different strategy now. Chris, you highlight that this is an artillery battle now. Artillery has been king in Europe for a long time, but it really is showing utility on both sides. But it also seems like this is sort of a slow choke by the Russians to just continuously pummel using artillery. So Chris, I'll have you kick it off. Just describe how you've seen a shift in the Russian strategy, and what is it now that we're just seeing lots of artillery attacks? What are the Ukrainians asking for now versus what they were wanting in the beginning? And are you seeing an uptick in what's coming into the country from Western militaries, or is it still not even close to what they are needing to get a little bit more of an edge here? Obviously talking artillery, talking anti-tank guided missiles, but maybe some air defense systems, things like that. So if you can kind of highlight what you're seeing, and then I'll let Tanya pile on top of that.
Sure. what we saw first on February 24th were strategic missile strikes. Russia using cruise missiles, long-range missiles to try to hit Ukrainian air defense, airports, other military installations, knocking them out, and then moving in by ground, right? So we did see these convoys of tanks and other self-propelled artillery, troop carriers, transport planes trying to come in, paratroopers dropping in from helicopters, closing in on key cities like Kiev and Kharkiv in the northeast. Despite what Putin said 3 days prior, which was this was going to be a quote special military operation to capture the eastern Donetsk and Lugansk regions. It was very clear from the start that the first days really were meant to be used to capture Kiev and to install a new Russian government or puppet government in Kiev. And when that failed, it became a more protracted invasion, and the Ukrainians were successful in repelling the Russian forces that had gathered around the capital, and also did not allow them to take Kharkiv, as well as many other strategic cities. I think there has only been one relatively large city captured by the Russians, and that's Kherson in the south. And after, I think it was end of March when the Russians retrieved from Kharkiv and Kiev region and regrouped and refocused their efforts to take Donetsk and Lugansk, transforming this into more of an artillery war and a slog. It's really become a war of attrition and a war for really the side that has the biggest, longest range weapon systems and the most ammunition to fire from those weapon systems. So right now, Russia has not seen things go according to plan, but it outnumbers Ukraine in terms of troops, weapons, ammunition. I've seen some analysts say that Russia has enough to go for another 12 months at this pace, or 3 months or 6 months. I've seen various things. Right now, they are outfiring Ukrainian forces 10-1. For every 10 shells, Ukraine can only respond with 1, and so they're really having to pick and choose their targets. And in most cases, just sitting and taking our artillery barrages, because there's not much else they can do. What they need is what they have been saying they have wanted since last winter, which is air defense systems. First and foremost, they have had some success in shooting down Russian aircraft and missiles, but they're not able to shoot all of them down. They are losing ground in the east because of the lack of air defense systems, and because of a lack of longer range artillery. And what they need is, what troops are saying they need are just simply more of everything. I forget the exact numbers that the president's office put out through one of its advisors last week, but I think it was something along the lines of 36,000 artillery shells every week, 1,000. Oh gosh, I'm going to forget exactly the numbers for everything, but basically air defense, a ton of ammunition, more Western weaponry, things that are going to allow them to not only fire back and answer Russia, but use the more precise weapons that we have in the US or in the UK or other Western nations to respond to those attacks. What the Americans and the Brits and other Europeans have given to Ukraine is great. There are very few complaints, right? Sometimes they're given weapons without instructions translated into Ukrainian or Russian, for example. That has happened. But they're using them to great effect. They're showing that they're very capable in using these weapons. They just simply don't have enough. It's just a numbers game right now, and they're just simply outnumbered.
Hey, Tanya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think the major lack is the lack of weaponry right now. It seems like from the news cycle, you can imagine that there are so many weapon support are coming to Ukraine, but in reality, when you go into this, positions, Ukrainian positions, you see that it's like it's not enough, and they're barely holding this position specifically, the other thing I would say that right now many not professional military joining the army, not trained, not well trained men are joining the army, which some of them I know personally. For example, some of them were my mates since the childhood, and now they're forced to go to fight in this war. And obviously, they're not the best fighters in the world, and they know very little about the war and weapon. So I think it's not enough trainings, or I would say like the newcomers, they're not trained well, they are not prepared for this war at all, I would say, so I think it's a big spirit, like huge will to fight Russians to win this war, but in reality I would say that there are a lot of issues that are on the way to this goal, and many of them time consuming. Sometimes it's not enough time to prepare a soldier for this war. And the other thing is that if we are trusting the official numbers, it's like it's 100 dead soldiers every day, and a lot of them also wounded. So I think, despite the the longer this conflict lasting, the worst situation is for Ukraine, I think, because of the proportion of the population of the country. It's like Russia is a lot bigger than Ukraine, and it has a lot more fighters and a lot more men who can attack basically Ukraine.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's a little bit alarming is just I was at a European Defense Exposition last week, and the discussion with industry is how to ramp up production now, because what is needed really to overmatch Russia and Ukraine is beyond the production capacity of many of these companies to produce things by like a year. They're going through capacity in a few months that, say one company can produce in 2 years, something like that. So it definitely gets, I think, more dire, I think, the longer this goes on, because we're not going to be able to keep up with, production that keeps country stockpiles at the ready, but also, supplements Ukraine to the point that they need. So we'll obviously be continuing to watch that. I wanted to ask a few questions from the audience because we are getting short on time. One is, what do you think have been the highlights of US and European media coverage of the war, and where do you see gaps that still should be filled? Tanya, I'll let you go first, and then Chris, I'll have you add to that.
I think it's very important that many US media and many international media are interested in the filtration camps, and many of them touching the base in this topic, and it's very interesting. I think many international media are admiring the story about the soldiers, but I think human stories are not equally important. I think they're equally important, like the stories of civilians who are suffering this war in the war zone, who are living in the war zone, and who don't have where to go, like it happened with Mariupol. We know about the evacuation of the population who has their own cars. They're evacuated using their own cars, but for those who didn't have their cars or who doesn't have their cars, they're entrapped in the city, and for them there was, I think, 3 or 5 buses organized, and that's it. Like, people eventually trapped in the city, which were heavily shelled, and where there is no fresh water. The situation is catastrophic there, and and the battle for Mariupol was pretty harsh, and we cannot imagine how many people died there and how many people buried just in their gardens. Or so I think human stories, the stories of wounded children, they're I think important. Many Ukrainians lost their limbs in this war, and I think it will change the country for quite of time, and probably forever, in the sense of providing the goods for these people, because some of them are kids, and they will live forever like this. So I hope that international media will touch this topic too, or will follow up this topic, because it's very important. And this is somehow will help to those kids, because we reported this story for the Telegraph, and then it got the attention of CNN. I was interviewed by CNN, and then this story went viral, and like all the organizations were reaching out to me to help like one specific girl, but in reality there are many of those girls, and there are many of the kids who are suffering right now. And I think, if you are a charity and watching this stream, you definitely have to, pay attention to this issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think Tanya is right. And one of the areas where I think Western media did a very good job of covering what's happening is in covering the atrocities that happened in the areas around Kiev region. I think if you look at, just how saturated the area was with journalists, and how much was being covered in places that the world had never heard of before. Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka became datelines and part of our lexicon for weeks, right? And now they're synonymous with the horrors and atrocities that we've seen Russian forces carry out. And I think that coverage played a serious role in Western governments deciding to send more assistance to Ukraine, financial assistance, military assistance. The Western world saw what Russia was doing, and it really was, I think, a turning point in that assistance. Unfortunately, the area where I think our coverage is lacking is not necessarily because of anything that we are doing wrong, but it's in Russia. We don't know a lot about what is happening inside of Russia, and that's because a lot of our Western media outlets and journalists have been kicked out. There are very few there. They're operating under very difficult circumstances. Most of them can't go further than Moscow. There's just not the resources that exist within the boundaries of Russia to properly cover that side of Russia's war against Ukraine. So, we're reading and learning a lot about Ukrainian people and about what's happening over here, but it's, there's a dearth of information on the Russian side. All of my very talented friends who worked as correspondents in Russia previously have been dispersed to Turkey or Latvia or Warsaw or Berlin, some other place to cover Russia externally. And so we're just not learning a lot about what's happening inside anymore.
Okay, we are right at the end here, but I did want to just, if there's anything that either of you would really like to address that I haven't asked about yet, I will give you guys each a minute or two to do that, and then we'll close out the hour.
I'll let Tanya have the last word, so I'll go ahead and start. I'll just say, I'll circle back to the issue of Ukrainian media and journalism, and one thing that I have seen that has changed in a very good way from 2014 is that a lot more Ukrainian journalists and Ukrainian voices are being heard and published and put front and center. I'll call out in particular the Atlantic and the Washington Post for allowing Ukrainian journalists to byline pieces, not just work as fixers and get contributing lines. When I was at BuzzFeed as well, we would give bylines to our producers or fixers. I have seen that practice become a lot more common in the coverage of the last few months than was, prevalent for the 8 years prior. So I would just encourage media organizations to continue to do that, because there are a lot of very talented journalists like Tanya and others who have something really interesting to say. And like I said earlier, they're not only reporting this, they're living it, right? They don't get to clock out and go home and lead some semblance of a normal life. They have to call their mother or their father and make sure that they weren't killed by a rocket today. So I guess I'll leave it there, and I'm sure Tanya will have something eloquent to say and wrap things up for us.
I would encourage many, as you know, probably Washington Post opened the office in Kiev, and I would encourage all the international media do the same. Many of them were kicked out from Russia, so you have place to stay now in Kiev, or place to report, there are many issues. I think we are right now in the middle or in the beginning of summer, where many politicians and journalists will take breaks, will be on the holidays, and I just wish to all of us to not give up on Ukraine or on this conflict, and follow the news and supply the weapon and help to the population of Ukraine as much as we can. I think this is where we are right now, and I think this is very crucial for all the people of Ukraine, that the whole world do not lose the attention to this conflict, or not forget that the war is lasting, because for Ukrainians it's ongoing and it's not stopping at all. And as long as it's an ongoing, the longer it's lasting, the more people we're losing, and the more childrens are under the fire, which make this conflict bloody and unfair. And I think I'm speaking right now not only as Ukrainian and as a journalist. For all of us, this conflict is painful in the sense that we every day has to report the painful stories of people who are suffering, and I think all of us want to take a break, but not all of us can do this. But generally speaking, yes, I wish this conflict will end soon, but also I wish to all of us and to all of our colleagues to not lose the patience and do not lose the attention for this war.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. I wish we had another hour with you two. Thank you so much, Chris and Tanya, for joining us and for giving us your time away from the important work you're doing in Ukraine. Please stay safe and be sure to stop by the National Press Club next time you're in Washington. And thanks to our audience for your questions. And finally, thank you to the Press Club's International Correspondents Committee, team member Viola Ginger, and Press Club membership director Kate Helster for organizing this event. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and continue to keep Ukraine and its people and the journalists working there in your mind.